Hello, everyone. The title of the presentation today is the classification of functional dysphagia in adults using deep structured learning of esophageal intraluminal admittance measurements. So functional dysphagia is the sensation of solid or liquid food sticking or passing abnormally through the esophagus. Now, currently, not much is known regarding the etiology of functional dysphagia. Its prevalence is unknown and generally has been poorly studied. It is mainly diagnosed based on exclusion. Symptoms should be present at least 3 months and not associated with anatomic abnormalities, reflux disease, or other motility disorders. The goal of the study was to see objectively whether patients who suffer from functional dysphagia have differences in the distension patterns during peristalsis compared to normal subjects. And so we use electrical admittance, which is basically the inverse of impedance, and a surrogate of distension, as features to neural networks which mimic human learning behavior in the brain to see if we can distinguish purely based on admittance between the normal and functional dysphagia group. So a bit of background on bioelectrical impedance analysis literature. So impedance measures the resistance of a body tissue to the flow of a small, harmless electrical signal. Now, naturally, current flows more easily through the parts of the body which are mostly composed of water, blood, urine, and muscle, compared to bone, fat, and air. So the current will flow through the path of least resistance in the body, that is through the extracellular fluid and muscle, because they naturally contain electrolytes. Now, the cell itself, it has capacitive reactance due to the existence of a non-conductive lipid between the two layers of the conductive protein molecules, and therefore has the structure of a capacitor. So impedance, denoted by Z, is an expression of the opposition that an electronic component system offers to alternating or either direct current. Now, impedance is a two-dimensional quantity. It consists of resistance and reactance. Now, in the cell membrane, because what we use in impedance imaging, we use low frequency, so all the current passes through the extracellular space. So we can ignore the reactive element. Impedance becomes equivalent to resistance. And based on physics, we also know that resistance is inversely proportional to the cross-sectional area, A, in a conductor. Now, we also found out that in the impedance imaging, resistance is equivalent to impedance. So the inverse of impedance, which is admittance, will be directly proportional to cross-sectional area or dilation of the esophagus. And within the esophagus, impedance measurement has been used to show the transit of the bolus within the length of the esophagus. Now they use the impedance catheter with 90 electrodes, giving us 18 measurements. It's spaced like 2 centimeters apart across the length of the esophagus. And a small electrical current is used to measure the impedance between each pair of rings along the length of the esophagus. If you want to show a schematic of the bolus, if you suppose the red curves are the lining of the esophagus, you have the bolus in brown, you have the air, you have the catheter, you have the two rectangular impedance electrodes and the pressure sensor, the circular one in the middle. At baseline, as you see, there's just the vessel lumen touching the catheter. We have just the baseline impedance shown in here. As the air reaches the electrodes, you can see the increase on the impedance. And with the passage of time, when the bolus reaches the electrodes, you can see a significant drop in the impedance level. Once the bolus passes the measuring electrodes, you can see the increase in the impedance within the contraction of the pressure, shown in blue. And finally, once the bolus and the air and the contraction wave pass, you can see a return to normal, both for the impedance in the orange and the pressure in blue. And in this figure, we can see actually the ultrasound sequence of a sample swallow. You see the baseline, where the esophagus is collapsed, number 1. Then in number 3, you have the dilation of the esophagus with the drop of the impedance. And then number 5, you have the simultaneous contraction. And number 8, going back to baseline. So in other words, actually impedance or admittance is a surrogate of distension. So once we have the admittance signals, the goal is to train a neural network to classify between normals and dysphagia patients. Now, why use deep learning? Why use artificial neural networks? Now, deep learning networks have been used to find complex relationships between output using nonlinear processing units, multiple hidden layers, and a lot of like special purpose architectures have been developed with the recurrent neural networks and long short-term memory layers, which we use in this study. So ANNs are constructed and implemented to model the human brain. They have been used to perform various tasks such as pattern matching, classification, optimization, approximation, data clustering, and these tasks are difficult for traditional computers. ANNs possess a large number of processing elements called nodes or neurons, and they operate in parallel. Neurons are connected with others by a connection link. Each link is associated with weights, which contain information about the input signal. Each neuron has an internal state of its own, which is a function of the inputs that the neuron receives. They incorporate 2 fundamental components of biological neural nets: neurons or nodes or synapses as weights. Now there are different types of neural networks. The main one is the feed-forward nets. They're unidirectional. Data is presented to the input layer, pass through the hidden layer, and pass to the output layer. The information is distributed, and the processing is. Now, the fundamental problem with feed-forward networks is that they don't have any notion of time. Now, so they only consider the current example that has been exposed to. So they're kind of nostalgic regarding their past. Now, here come the recurrent networks. And the difference is they do have a feedback loop, which kind of gives them that kind of connection to their past decisions. So they usually say that these networks, the RNNs, have some sort of memory. So this has a purpose. So there's information in the sequence itself. So if you have a temporal signal, a recurrent net is used to perform tasks that feed-forward networks cannot. A subtype of RNNs called the long short-term memory units are the most powerful and well-known subset. And these are a type of ANNs just to recognize patterns in the sequence of data, like whether you have numerical time series, stock market values, handwritings, and spoken word. What makes them different than the typical RNN from other network architectures is that they take time and sequence into account. They have a temporal dimension. And in 1997, two scientists solved the problem of getting the RNN to remember things for a long time, hundreds of steps. This way, it can learn long-term dependencies between time steps of sequence data. In our case, the admittance data between normals and functional dysphagia patients. You can create an array containing a sequence of an input layer, the long short-term memory layer, a fully collected layer, a softmax layer, and a classification layer to distinguish between the two groups. For this study, we conducted high-resolution non-metry impedance experiments in 27 asymptomatic normals and 27 functional dysphagia patients with a brief esophageal dysphagia questionnaire score of above 10, using 10 milliliter saline swallows, half normal, in the minus 15 trend position. And to account for the inter-swallow variability, we use 4 swallows per subject. Next, we chose an ROI, that is the region between the lower edge of the UES and the upper edge of the ALES, from the testicles from the pharyngeal opening as a region of interest. You can see the pressure heat map, and alongside it the admittance heat map, which is the inverse of impedance. To train the classifier, or the LSTM neural network, we require a one-dimensional signal. So whatever channel falls between the ROI that we chose, we sum it up, we get a one-dimensional signal. We do this for all the normals and for all the patients. You can see a sample signal for the normal and patient, functional dysphagia patient. And once we have that, we can extract some time frequency features to train the deep learning neural network. Here you can see for global signals for both normal and functional dysphagia patients. So if you take one of these admittance signals and we take the power spectrum, this is what we get, and we can always extract some features from this power spectrum. Here we took out the spectral entropy, which also produces a one-dimensional signal, and then we feed this into the neural network for the classification. And we want to see how good these features serve to train and test the classifier. So amazingly, if you just purely train the LSTM network using admittance features, a surrogate of distension, without using any pressure features, you get an overall accuracy of 95% just for training and 83% for testing. So you can see in panel A, in the training session, out of the 96 functional dysphagia, only one was misclassified as being normal. And we also calculated the positive predictive values. That came around 99% in training and 100% during testing for FD, high sensitivity, and a positive predictive value of 92.7 and 66.7 for normals in training and testing. And we also had true positive rates of 93.1 and 75% for functional dysphagia during training and testing. And the TPR was 98.9 and 100 for normal in training and testing, respectively, which are really good results. In conclusion, our study shows that even though normal subjects and functional dysphagia patients share similar contraction patterns, and that has been one of the fundamental problems of diagnosis. However, if you just use classification purely based on admittance, which is the inverse of impedance, a surrogate of distension, you can have a high discriminatory power between the two groups. So this by itself indicates, and it points to a significant revision of current esophageal manometry diagnosis, which is purely based on pressure values and parameters. Thank you.